You coming? Come on in, let's go. Come on in, boy. I've been away for a much needed break. But you know, when you're travelling back home, you have that moment of, what's the garden going to be like? And actually, we've had a little bit of good news, and some not so. The wind has knocked a few things over, so this Artemisia has just collapsed. So that's easy. We can stake that one up. But look at this in front of me. This is Salix magnifica, which, let's be honest, is not looking quite so magnificent at the moment. But before I went away, because we'd had so much dry, I thought I'd lost it. But I've come back, and that rain that we've had has played its part, because there's signs of growth. And I think the lesson from that, and especially the season that we've had, is let's not be too quick to write things off. All I do is go out and just start to sort of scratch the bark, see if there's any signs of life. And you see green, it wants to fight on. Eh? As I've said, nature is a wonderful thing. What I'm going to do is tidy off these brown leaves, because it looks better more than anything. Anyway, we've got plenty to get on with today. Francis is in West Yorkshire to see the most extraordinary garden.
What makes this truly remarkable is that it's a private garden. It's the work of just one man, and this is just the front garden.
We meet a litigator turned propagator who's created a beautiful sanctuary from the world.
I was a litigation lawyer, which involves arguing, and I don't really like arguing. And the nice thing about gardening is there's no one to argue with. And the plants just do their own thing, and I do my own thing, and I absolutely love it.
Advolly immerses herself in the romance and intrigue of a garden designed by Vita Sackville-West and her husband, Harold.
Their marriage was a safe harbour, and the affairs were mere ports of call. And walking through this garden, you can sense the balance of Vita and Harold's personalities.
And a chef turned gardener showcases the best of plot to plate, and he really knows his onions.
I've got about 6 different varieties in here, all grown from seed. This is a showpiece. Look at the size of that one.
You coming? Good lad. Right, let's have some fun. So this is going to be a Shady container that's called Getting to Know Ya. I'm going to use plants that I don't know that well, and instead of just popping them where the label says in the garden, I don't forget where I've put them in the garden, which means they get extra TLC, because I put them in a container that I either go and sit by every single day, or maybe I walk by, or they're close to the greenhouse where I can water. So I've drilled holes in the bottom. So the next thing is to use the crock, which is broken old terracotta pots. The most important thing with this container is it drains well through the winter months. So next up is the gravel, if I can lift this up. And if I put a layer now, right across the bottom. So next, we'll start building our compost. So what I've done here is I've done a mix of peat-free compost, a little bit of topsoil in, some horticultural grit, and some composted bark. These are all sort of woodland, shade-loving plants. Now I'm going to add a magic ingredient. All right, think about a woodland. What happens in a woodland? Leaves fall every single year, they create leaf mould. So now if you think about it, what I've done is I've created my wooden floor. And now with the plants, the first one we're going to go for is this Mahonia. And this is called Volcano. The flowers come about October time. They start red and then more or less explode to this sort of golden yellow. But like a lot of the sort of newer Mahonias that have come to the market, they're not got those really spiny leaves that you could not run your hands through. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that out of the pot. Root system's good, and we're just going to work that at the back there. So that, though, in time, you know, will need to come out of this container, because in the garden, once I get to know it, that's where it will be. It will get to 1.5 metres, but there, next 12 months or so, will be absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do now is counterbalance. So I'm going to use this sort of Japanese holly fern, not a plant that I know. A mate says, Frosty, you need to try this. And first of all, I said, is it hardy? And he went, yeah, totally hardy. So next, I think we're going to go for a Pachysandra, but not as you know it. I think so many of us know Pachysandra as something that's grown, you know, in supermarket car parks, in shady spaces. Well, this is called Krug's cover. It flowers in the winter, white and scented, and that is followed by a little berry. All right. Now I'm going to try and come back in this side. So what I'm going to go for next is this Proopsis, and this is undulata. I know at the moment you need to look carefully, but look, that speckled stem, that, if you imagine, would be scrambling on a woodland floor in China. All right. So this is called Neolobatum. It's a fern that ultimately will get to probably about 40, 50 centimetres. So the next one is Rhinechia. I suppose a little like lily of the valley. The scent is really strong. This idea of, you know, creating containers like this that are not driven, you know, by loads and loads of flower cover are a great way to understand planting design. So all I'm doing now is just filling the voids in between the plants with that first compost mix that I made. So all I need to do now is give that a good soak in, let it settle. But while I'm doing that, Francis went to West Yorkshire to visit a very special garden.
I'm so lucky to get to visit some really wonderful gardens, but this one has to be up there. It's got swathes of grasses and perennials that snake their way around the space. It's really, really balanced, and the overall feel is incredibly naturalistic. But to create this has clearly taken an expert eye. But what makes this truly remarkable is that it's a private garden. It's the work of just one man, and this is just the front garden.
The back garden is equally extraordinary, with more gorgeous planting merging with the hills and trees beyond. The thread connecting it all is a devotion to a particular style, one which has captured our imagination and become hugely influential: prairie planting.
When prairie planting first emerged as a way of gardening, it was really groundbreaking, and it was unlike anything that had come before. Generally, it's a planting scheme based around ornamental grasses, as you would see in a prairie, usually in North America. But the way of designing the beds is completely different. Rather than a cottage garden, it's enormous blocks of planting, things like this Persicaria, there's Eupatorium, there's a huge block of phlox here. And these huge groupings would never be seen in a cottage garden. But the idea is that on a big landscape scale, seeing huge groups of plants like this, especially with grasses running through them, can look really naturalistic. And generally speaking, prairie schemes are cut back once a year, usually in the spring. And that means you also have winter structure, so seed heads and berries, and of course this massive, beautiful border in the height of the season.
The man behind these wonderful drifts of perennials is retired GP Stephen Medley.
So Stephen, this is obviously a commitment to this style, but tell me what inspired your interest in prairie-style, naturalistic-style planting?
I began to see articles in magazines and on the television about Pete Adolf, and then went to have a look at his garden in Scampston, which at that time was quite new for England.
Yeah.
How could I copy that and bring that look into my garden? How could I move from a League Two garden to a Premiership garden?
And how did you?
A lot of hard work. So I first of all started removing the shrubs that were in this border and replacing them with herbaceous perennials, all in block forms, and then contrasting the flower heads from one species to the next. So we've got spires there, we've got baubles here, an umbel in the phlox,
Yeah.
umbels up there with the agapanthus,
Yeah.
more baubles with the verbena bonariensis,
Yeah.
and of course the essential grasses.
Yes. Yes. So this is the beginning.
This is the
first
beginning.
bed.
This is the first bed, this is how it started.
After perfecting his prairie-style border, Stephen's next project was to create a prairie-style meadow, employing a very specific technique known as matrix planting. In this kind of scheme, a single or a handful of species dominate, forming a matrix into which other plants are blended.
In this design, Sporobulus heterolepis constituted initially 65% of the matrix,
Right.
Echinacea pallida hula dancer 25% of the matrix, and Eryngium alpinum formed 10% of the matrix. Then through the matrix, you grow individual plants, such as this Veronicastra america,
Yes. Yes.
or the Eryngium ucifolium, or blocks of plants, such as the Hylotelephium.
When you say it like that, it sounds like a formula, and yet when you see it, it's just breathtakingly beautiful, isn't it? It's so lovely. And presumably that matrix has changed over time, but when was this planted?
This was planted in 2015. This was my first post-retirement project.
Right.
I did half a day at work,
Right.
half a day at Craven College in Skipton on the horticulture course, and then the day after started lifting the grass from this area to start the meadow.
So first day of retirement.
First day of retirement.
Stephen put his well-earned free time to use by growing the huge amount of plants he'd need from seed or cuttings.
You're pretty good at propagating then.
I had to be.
Yeah, because I mean it would cost a small fortune to fill
Yeah.
these beds with plants. How many plants are in them?
There are round about 380 Sporobulus, about 180 Echinacea pallidas,
Okay,
plus all the rest.
right.
So there were plants everywhere.
Do you have a method when it comes to how you place things out? Like which ones you plant first? Is it Sporobulus that goes in first?
You know, I planted the structure plants first.
Okay, so that's
So
things like the
taller
Eryngiums.
Eryngiums, the Veronicastrums,
Right.
and the blocks, the Echinops blocks, the Limoniums, and then filled in with the matrix
Okay,
in the spaces.
okay.
And the average planting density through the whole planting must be around about 7 per square metre.
Stephen has been pretty meticulous in creating his meadow, but in some parts of the garden, he's wandered off script, showing a lightness of touch all his own.
This area here is one of my favourite parts of the garden. The colour scheme's just beautiful. It's so soft with kind of ochres of the Nacella tenuissima, which most people would know as Stipa tenuissima, and also all the different soft blues. There's deep blue of Veronica, there's Perovskia, and then there's soft yellow scabious through it as well. Now, originally this was planted as block planting, but over time, different species have self-seeded and moved around. And it goes to show you that the gardener has a big impact on how this will eventually be. You could really carefully edit and keep it in the blocks that you originally had, or you could, like Stephen has done, allow it to be dynamic and change and shift over the years. but always with this very tempered, very controlled colour palette that elevates it and stops it from being a meadow and keeps it a beautiful border. I think it's clear that Stephen is not the kind of man to blow his own trumpet, but I can do it for him, because to have envisaged this, designed it, cleared it, planted it, and then maintained it all by himself on this scale is such an achievement, and he should be exceedingly proud of this garden because it is absolutely glorious.
What a garden. What did you think, boy? To be fair, I'd rather have a drink out of your watering can, Dad. Let's crack on. Meet Dahlia Murkii, which is my favourite dahlia. Simple, mauve flower, not a lot bigger than that. Native of Mexico, gets to, what am I? I'm over 6 foot, so you're talking about 1.6, 1.7 metres. For me, to date, has been totally and utterly hardy. But that said, if we have a really cold, wet winter, I could lose this. So what I do this time of year is collect some seed. When do you do it? Well, if you start to look here, I've got flowers that are doing their business. I've still got some flowers to come, and I've got ones that have gone over. So the first thing to do for me is just to pick one that you think might have seeds in it, and just turn it out in your hand, and you'll soon see, there we go, there's a load of seeds in there. Then what you need to do is every time you go shopping from now on, do not ever throw a paper bag away. And then I'm just going to work across, taking some of these off. And at the moment, all I'm going to do is drop these in here. You know, this is a plant that will come true from seed, which is brilliant. What I'll do when I've done these is I will put them in my office, because the seeds are not going to get damp at all. So there we go. I reckon that will do me there. So what I could do now with this, now I've collected some seeds, I could now go over and I could literally tidy the rest of the bits and pieces off, making sure the flowers have gone over. This will now carry on flowering probably right into October, could even be November. But we're not stopping there. We're going to make the most of this beautiful sunshine. There's more to collect. Hey, I'm laughing because I've got to show you this. All the years that I've gardened, and there's still certain things that blow my mind. This is a peony called Molly the Witch. Slow grower, but look at that foliage, is incredible. Then on top of that, April, May. Hello, young man. You all right? Flowers, April, May, like that soft yellow. And I would love to grow it from seed. And you think, wow, look at that. Pink seed popping, that's got to be ready. But actually, with this particular plant, that pink seed indicates that it's infertile. If you wanted to sow the seed, it would need to be a dark blue, black colour. And even then, it would take you probably about 2 years to germinate. It's amazing, isn't it? The growing world. Let's find something that we can propagate. I know it doesn't look a lot, but this is a plant that I fell in love with probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It's called Delphinium recuenii. I mean, it's got a sort of soft blue flower, that's about June time. It's an incredible plant. And you'll read, some places it will tell you that it's a short-lived perennial. Other places it will tell you that actually it's a biennial, so it completes its growing cycle in 2 years. But for me, strangely, a lot of the time now it's behaving like an annual. So it's hitting the ground, it's germinating, coming up and doing this all in 12 months. And I'm gonna tip the seeds and you'll see if this works. There you go. You can see how many seeds just literally pop out. The 2 plants that I've collected from are species plants, which means, you know, they grow in the wild. That means the seed that I collect from them will come true to the parent. Whereas if you start collecting from plants that have been bred, so we call the hybrids, then you're not guaranteed that they're going to be true to the parent. Sometimes this growing world, as fascinating as it is, can be a little bit complicated. Now, we are off to meet a man who, 14 plus years ago, decided to totally and utterly change his life.
I got into gardening as a child, and now later in life, I very much enjoy the physical side, and I enjoy the feeling at the end of the day when you really feel you've achieved something and, frankly, you are exhausted. But it's very rewarding. The planting in the garden is quite big and blousy and bold. I'm not sure that reflects me as a person, to be honest, because I think I'm quite conservative with a small c. By nature, I'm actually fairly introverted. And so the garden gives me a way to be a little bit extrovert. I'm Rudyard Jindal. I used to be a lawyer, and this is my garden in Suffolk. And it's something which I've created myself over the last 14 years. I trained as a lawyer, and I spent 20-odd years in London and in Hong Kong. But ultimately, it just wasn't my personality, and I gave up my career in my mid-40s. I was a litigation lawyer, which involves arguing, and I don't really like arguing. And the nice thing about gardening is I'm out here usually by myself, and there's no one to argue with. And the plants just do their own thing, and I do my own thing, and I absolutely love it. It's been quite a journey from giving up my career and then moving here full-time in 2019 and getting married and having a very different life. The sensible thing to do with a garden when you first start out is to leave it a year and see how the wind blows and the land drains and the sun shines. But I was impatient. I wanted to get on with it. I had the idea of creating a garden in the field which wraps around the cottage. So I started off with the wildflower meadow and the formal garden, but I've expanded beyond that to create a prairie garden. Because it's quite a large plot, it's about 3 acres, that sight lines are quite important because you want to be able to lead people around the garden. Without a doubt, this is one of our favourite areas. This meadow has been going for about 14 years. To come through the gate and to walk into this and to see every day what might be in the meadow is really rewarding and fun. So what I did was mow it as low as I could and then scarify or rake it to create space for the wildflower seeds. So here we're on pretty solid clay, and so I got a mix which was suitable for clay soils. So this is yellow rattle. Here you can see it in flower. This is a very clever plant because it strangles grasses and it creates space thereby for wildflower seeds to grow. We have quite a decent variety of wildflowers in here. Obviously the oxeye daisies. We also get the orchids. And the one down here is a lovely pyramid orchid. It's never ending and it's changing all the time as well, and we hope we'll get more interest and variety as the years go on. But I thought it'd be really nice to be able to walk through the meadows. So we have this curving path, and that makes a real difference because you can get really in amongst the flowers, which is lovely. But also the sense that when you mow a path, it lifts everything else around it and it creates definition, and everything else stands out just a little bit more. I'm really a self-taught gardener. I did a few day courses, but basically I went to a lot of gardens and I was always at the front of the queue on the tour with my notebook in hand. So my knowledge built up in that way. At Digster they have topiary in the middle of a meadow, and that inspired me to think about doing something similar here. So these are my hornbeam cubes. We have 3 of them in a row, and they add an important aspect of formality to the garden. So I love the contrast of them. This one here is probably about 7 feet high. They were staked for the first 2 or 3 years, and then when they've reached the height you want, you cut the tops off, and then that causes the rest of it to get bushy. I'm really happy with the way these have turned out. They're very tight, they're very square, and in my dreams I'm thinking, well, maybe I could cut them at an angle and make them look like tumbling dice. My parents came to England in the mid-50s, and we ended up in Huddersfield. And my father fell ill with cancer and passed away within 6 months. My mother's garden was a sanctuary for her from a busy life as a doctor, challenging times in the 60s and 70s. I just sort of fell into the garden. She never asked me to do anything. I just did it because it was there and I enjoyed it. Mowing the lawn and being creative with my stripes. There is a picture of me aged maybe, 4 or 5 years old, and I'm standing behind a lawnmower. My mother always wore a sari to work, and when we could afford it, my mother took my brother and I to India, and on those trips, we often went to sari shops, and I would help my mum. She would ask my opinion about the sari she was about to buy, and I think that experience has stuck with me in a way, in that I do have an interest in texture and form and colour. So in the meadow we've created several kind of standalone island beds. Initially I wasn't sure what to put into it, but I love irises. Irises, after they've flowered, need sun, and you need to get sun onto the rhizomes. And so I had that in mind, and therefore I wanted to put in plants that were light and airy, whilst at the same time creating later season interest. So this is Achillea gold plate, and then in the winter you get these lovely brown seed heads, which are so attractive. Down here we have Gaura whirling butterflies. Again, it moves in the wind, it doesn't shade the irises too much. So this is the long border which sits in front of the cottage. Initially it was only about 6 feet deep, and that was a mistake because it just looked like it was pushed against the hedge and you couldn't really appreciate it. So over the years I've brought it forward and then forward again and then forward again. So now it's about 12 or 15 feet deep. I think height is really important in a border, especially when it's this wide. And for me, one of the nicest plants is this phlomis. We're all probably aware of the yellow phlomis, but this is a sort of a mauve one, which is very pretty. And this wonderful Lychnis chalcedonica also provides height and colour. So it's very stimulating. It self-seeds, and if you look over to this side, you'll see a whole host of them together. So the height is really important because it lifts the border and it causes you to look up as you walk through it. Having been a lawyer for 20-odd years and really doing something which I didn't enjoy and frankly did my head in, it was important for me to find something that defined me, that perhaps I could be good at. And I really wanted to create something beautiful. Although people say once a lawyer, always a lawyer, I kind of hope now maybe I can say I'm a gardener. I think so.
I think if you've created a garden that beautiful, you can definitely call yourself a gardener. And so many of us think we need that sort of space to make a difference, and we don't. I moved in here and I wanted to create a garden that carried more diversity, so it needed to have a mini meadow. So this was an old scruggy path. I had the pear trees and then an area that was about 7 metres by about 1.8, and I thought, that's it. We've got the red campion, we've got the yarrow now, you know, things like scabious, knapweed. For me, the bit that's blown my mind is the wildlife that came in and used this meadow and how beneficial it's been to my veg garden and the rest of the garden. You can now see most of the flowers have gone over. It's looking slightly tatty, but there's loads of seed heads in here. So this is a time of year now to get in and cut it back to the ground. As you can see, this is a slightly awkward space. If I get the strimmer in here, it's going to go all over the place. There's no chance I'm getting a mower on here. So my chosen tool is, as strange as it might seem, a hedge trimmer. I'm going to use this and we're going to work our way through. Obviously, you know, we think wildflower, everything's a wildflower, and technically you're right. But what I don't want in here is any real pernicious weed that's going to sort of take it over. And I've got bindweed in my hedge, and I've just spotted it in here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark it. You know, during the next sort of few days, I can dig that out, you know, and get rid of it. I'm never going to get rid of it totally, but at least then I can just keep on top of it. Right. Who doubted me? I told you it would work. I might get in there with a fork and thrash it around a little bit. And what I'm trying to do is get the seed to fall to the ground. That then will germinate for next year, but then I will tidy away, because ultimately if it breaks down it will start to feed the soil, and that's one thing that you definitely don't want. While I get on with cutting the other half, we are now off with Advolly, who's gone to visit a garden that has been created by a fascinating couple.
When it comes to gardeners, there are some names that are synonymous with a particular place. And for many, the name Vita Sackville-West means only one thing: Sissinghurst, the Elizabethan castle in Kent that her and her husband Harold revived and turned into one of Britain's most iconic gardens. However, it was not their first, not even their second garden, but their third. Before Vita and Harold created Sissinghurst, their early horticultural knowledge came from here, just 20 miles away, at a garden called Longbarn. Vita was born in 1892, the only child to aristocratic parents. She began writing at an early age, finishing 8 novels before she was 18. She would go on to become a world-renowned poet and writer, as well as a garden designer. In 1913, she married Harold Nicholson, a diplomat, much to the disappointment of her parents, who had hoped that she would marry one of her other wealthier suitors. When they moved here, Vita and Harold were complete novices, but as they built up the garden together, it brought out their different strengths. Harold was in charge of the structure, strong lines of paths, hedges and walls, while Vita filled every space with the rich and overflowing planting that she loved. Vita's motto was cram, 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 and even today the garden is filled to overflowing. You can see Harold's outline in the strong east-west paths that line the garden. And then, running at right angles is this. A stunning arch, recently replanted with scented roses and other climbers. But you can see that the path to the bench is not dead straight, which just shows how organically this garden developed by a couple who were still very new to gardening. Vita and Harold planned this garden to thrive long after them. On the yew columns that run the length of the garden, Vita wrote to Harold and said, "They will look silly at first, but when we're a handful of ashes, they will draw charabancs, buses, full of tourists from London," which they regularly do. Yews like these were crucial to Vita and Harold's big idea at Longbarn: garden rooms. They divided up the area into separate spaces, each with a theme designed to evoke its own atmosphere. The Dutch garden's L-shaped beds were filled with a mass of cottage garden planting, which felt exuberant and very modern. But next door were two peaceful knot gardens which wouldn't have looked out of place in the 16th century. Further away from the formality and colour of the main garden, the orchard has a completely different feel and much closer to the practical gardens that would have surrounded the house for hundreds of years before. And although Vita was the plants woman, Harold also had strong opinions on what plants would and wouldn't work at Longbarn. This is a collection of letters, and in one he writes, "I agree that if rhododendrons were native to Kent, they would be exactly and absolutely what we want. But they're not natives, and we should spoil our lovely Kentish atmosphere." And I agree with Harold. It certainly has the feel of a Kentish farm. And through these various garden rooms, Harold and Vita hosted fabulous parties filled with the great and the good. And amongst the artists, authors and actors were some of the many lovers that Vita and Harold took. Harold and Vita had an open marriage, which was highly unconventional for the 1920s. They loved, trusted and respected each other, but both had the freedom to indulge their own passions of the heart. The longest and most intense of all was Vita's love affair with the renowned writer, Virginia Woolf. Vita and Virginia's affair continued for several years. All the while, Vita was carrying on with a married woman named Mary Campbell. Honestly, it's like a soap opera. If only these yews could talk. As their son later put it, their marriage was a safe harbour, and the affairs were mere ports of call. And walking through this garden, you can sense the balance of Vita and Harold's personalities. Despite all the drama, Harold and Vita lived a happy life, leaving Longbarn for Sissinghurst in 1932 and remained married until their deaths. And the joy of sitting in a poet's garden is that sometimes you can see it through their eyes. In 1915, not long after they'd moved here, Vita wrote a very simple poem called The Garden. "We had a garden on a hill. We planted rose and daffodil, flowers that English poets sing and hoped for glory in the spring. We waited for them all to grow. We planted wallflowers in a row, and lavender and borage blue, but love was all that ever grew. In the end, that's what this garden is. Not just a backdrop for tempestuous affairs. It is a garden built of love, as all the best gardens are.
I love that idea that even then, as a couple, you know, they were creating it for the next generation to enjoy. And also, wouldn't you have loved an invite to one of their parties? I know I would. So, that's it, job done. Discovered some step-over apples that I'd forgotten about. But the next point of interest here will really be the spring bulbs. As I wander up the steps to the gravel garden, things sort of died away over the season, and I just want to fill the space. So I just thought here it would be lovely just to add another layer, just going into the back end of the summer, early autumn. I'm creating a rhythm through the garden that's driven by grasses. So we've got a Molinia here, we've got a Molinia up there, which are quite low growth, big spiky flowers. So what I've done in here is gone for a Calamagrostis, and this is called Brachytricha. But the interesting thing with this is it will get to about 1.2 metres and then start to flower. But the flower has got a beautiful sort of purpley tinge to it. So it's going to sort of sit here, connect the verticals of the grasses, but then it's going to start to play with these plants. And then anemone, good, reliable autumn colour. This is a new one to me called Serenade. This will get up to about sort of 600 mil growth, and the flower will sit about 200 mil above that. And you've got a lovely pink flower, but also at the same time, beautiful, strong, rich foliage. So that'll go in there. And the star of this particular show is going to be this oak-leafed hydrangea. As we go into the autumn, the leaves on this are rich, glorious, deep, that sort of warmth that the autumn colours bring. But when it loses its leaves, as it matures, the stems become quite interesting because they slightly peel and they're slightly more coppery. So that's how this whole thing really glues together. And then when it comes to the planting, I've made sure everything's weed-free. This time of year, if you're thinking about doing any planting, obviously that moisture content is going to be really important. So what I've gone for is some composted bark. What I might do afterwards as well, when I've finished and I've given everything a really good soaking, is that I might use some of this bark in around the plants just to lock that moisture in. What's lovely about this particular oak-leafed hydrangea is it will take more sun than lots of the others, but this will also deal with semi-shade. What I don't want to do is plant this too deep. And if you imagine, you can see that growth habit there now. What's going to happen is slowly over time it's going to mound a little bit on the steps, up on there, and it gives this lovely sort of link. And then if we put the anemone in there, and I know the Japanese anemones don't always come with the best reputation, and you know, some people can be a little snobby about them and say, yeah, but they're thuggish. But actually, in reality, look at the growth, that late colour that it's going to bring you, and with that, the reliability. So next, we're going to get in this Calamagrostis. grasses are not everybody's cup of tea, all right? So my sales pitch to you, if you were not into them, was just to say that not every plant you add to your garden needs to be a star, all right? They play beautifully with the light, they'll give you some movement, a moment of calm, and even sound, you know, on a windy day. But what is lovely is once I water those, you know, mulching around the next few weeks, because there's warmth in that soil, those roots will really start to get away. And going into the autumn, coming up those stairs, it'll just give me a moment before I find my little seat over in the corner there. Now, we're off to meet a chef who has had his head turned by the wonder of Grow Your Own.
I'm a real fan of preserving the season as much as possible. As we all know as gardeners, we always end up with a glut of something. That's the time to preserve it. So you've still got the great flavour of that produce, no matter what time of year. My name's Darryl Taylor. I head up the produce garden here at Time, a country estate in the Cotswolds with a hotel and restaurant. So now I'm a gardener, but actually I am a trained chef. So my background is cooking, but I've always had a passion for growing. As a chef, I know how I want things to taste in my kitchen. So when I grow here, I kind of almost know the end result. I know what I'm looking for. I know the size that I would like to have that in my kitchen. I've just always had this kind of inner love for propagation and growing things from seed. It's so rewarding. So when I was offered a full-time position as the gardener here, I just had to think about it a little bit, because the garden here is pretty big. I took a little step back and thought, well, how can I really kind of make this garden work? And I love it because it's a new challenge. So I'm on a great now kind of learning curve about different varieties. And yeah, so I'm beginning my career, my second career, which is really exciting. And now I'm a chef turned gardener. I love growing onions. I've got about 6 different varieties in here, all grown from seed, ready to be brought inside now and just finished drying off. But this is a showpiece. Look at the size of that one. Beetroot. This is called Chioggia. It's a stripy beetroot from the Chioggia region in northern Italy. Golden beetroot here. They're heading up quite nicely. They'll be ready soon. Really nice thing, beetroot, just kind of whole when they're quite small. You can just roast them. You could accompany that to some roast meat, a pork chop. You could have it with some tahini drizzled on. Beetroots are really versatile, a really nice vegetable. I like them a lot. And then these lovely guys, trombetta, courgette. You can roast them and they'll hold their shape. They don't have a huge water content, so quite a nice thing to kind of showcase, but I think they're wonderful. What was a great thing for me in my career as a chef, it was always about the produce. So in this polytunnel, I'm experimenting this year with gherkins. Never grown them before. I've planted quite a few plants because, you know, gherkins are quite small, so if we're going to pickle them or make a crop worthwhile, I need a decent quantity. So these are grown in the same way that you would grow cucumbers. I've got them growing up these wires. Every morning I just come in and then just twist them round, and they've got these tendrils which will just wire themselves on. So we would brine them to start with in some salt and then pack them into a solution, maybe with some fennel seeds or horseradish leaves. I'm always thinking about what I'm going to grow, what I'm growing next year. I've already started the list on my phone. That's been going forever. So I'm always thinking about that time ahead of what we can look to grow and go on that growing journey, I suppose. We often find we grow all of our vegetables summertime and don't necessarily think about kind of those winter harvests. But radicchios and chicories are a really underrated vegetable, pretty straightforward to grow and delicious to cook. Radicchios and chicories being a leafy crop, they are a nice thing to follow on from a legume, so a broad bean, a pea, an early crop of runner beans, because the legumes fix nitrogen into the soil, and it's really good to follow on something that's going to really like that part of the garden, that nitrogen fix. Radicchio is even really nice in a pasta. Sometimes I've sliced and fried radicchio with cream and rosemary, maybe some chili flakes and some capers, and you could mix that through some penne pasta or some spaghetti. This is a real journey of learning, and I feel, you know, I've got the base foundations as a gardener, but now I'm a grower. It's nourishing to having your hands in the soil. It's really hard work, and I take the approach as I do when I'm in the kitchen. I want to be productive. Yeah, it's really rewarding. This is my fattoush salad, a traditional Lebanese salad, showcasing the beautiful ingredients we've got in the garden at the moment. I take 3 varieties of tomato, Atomic Fusion, Green Zebra, and one of my favourites, Black Cherry. Toss those with cucumbers, 1 green, 1 crystal lemon, celery and feta cheese. Add soft herbs and a good squeeze of lemon. Throw in a huge pinch of sumac, and finally a good glug of olive oil. Toasted pita bread, salt and pepper, mix it all up. And there's my fattoush salad.
I thought that salad was absolutely incredible. In fact, watching Daryl make it just made me peckish. And also, the idea of using horseradish leaves to flavour the gherkins when you're pickling them. I am definitely going to use that, so thank you. I said about my holiday, didn't I? This was the biggest surprise, the veg garden. And anybody that grows courgettes will know you end up with courgettes, courgettes, courgettes. Or a marrow. So that will definitely be a meal later on in the week. I want to pick all these little babies. So this time of year, it's all about picking, picking and picking. And on that note, let's see what else we can find. It is like a journey of discovery. This is a great little herb called silver sorrel. If I chop this finely, it gives a lovely sort of citrusy flavour on salad. Right, come on. Hey, you're gonna love this. Nasturtiums are doing really well. That peppery flower is incredible. Dwarf French beans, it's nice and easy. These beans are like incredible. Just so many of them. Look at that. Absolutely wonderful. So I think now, just some young leaves to add to a salad, and maybe some cut flower. Oh, I love the taste of chard. And then maybe just a few Astrantia stems. Actually, I nearly forgot something. Come with me. Anybody that grows veg and fruit will understand this. Each year, I think you have a moment of glory. Well, this is it. These peaches, the crop is unbelievable. Wow. I'm telling you, life does not get much better than that. So, well, I'll pick the rest of these. Here's a few things you could be doing at the weekend, obviously, if you fancy it. Hostas can look a little untidy after they've finished flowering, so it's worth removing the spent blooms once they've gone over. Cut each stem back to the base, taking care not to cut any leaves by mistake. Your plants will look a lot better as a result and won't waste any energy making seeds. Composting is a great way of making use of your garden waste, as long as you have a good balance between green and brown. Soft material can be added as it is, but anything woody is best chopped up. When it starts to rot down, turn it every now and then using a fork. This helps to mix up the ingredients and add air, speeding up the decomposition process. Coriander is easy to grow from seed and, with a bit of protection, may even survive the winter outdoors. Using a large pot or a spare patch of earth, make a series of shallow drills. Water allowed to drain and then soak into the wet soil, leaving about 5 centimetres, which is 2 inches, between each seed. I like to sow mine now as it tends to bolt over the summer. Keep well watered and, with luck, you'll have some leaves to pick come October. Come on, mate. We have a special guest. Look who's come to say hello. It's Isla. Interestingly, the amount of people since we've had Buster are saying, is Isla okay? Yes, Isla is okay. She's quite happy and loves being out in the garden. Eh? Don't you, girl? Yeah. And it has been a great day. But if you grow veg and fruit, for me, that takes it all on to a different level. You know, I've got my chard, my beans. I'm thinking maybe pasta, cream. You know, the marrow, maybe that's stuffed later on in the week. And then rounding that all off with those beautiful peaches. Eh? That's got to be my proudest moment in the garden this year. Keep that simple, ice cream, job done. Anyway, I'm afraid that is it from us this week. Monty will be back next week at Longmeadow. In the meantime, enjoy your bank holiday weekend and look after yourselves. Bye-bye.